We're in a very unique season right now, and I don't mean because of COVID. I mean in relation to where we are in the midst of COVID. We've had 11 months of this pandemic and all that it has brought to our lives and taken away from them. And we still have, another 5 or 6 months to go, maybe longer, depending on the vaccine rollout. Meaning it could be the fall before a sense of normalcy returns, which means right now we're in the middle. We're at a halfway point. We're at an in-between stage. Yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but it's at the end of the tunnel, and we're not through the tunnel. Most of us will spend the next few months watching other people get the vaccine while we have to wait. One person called it vaccine purgatory. We might see certain business sectors rebound while ours stays depressed. More than likely, some things we don't care about will get to reopen, and the things that we care about most will be delayed. And then there's just the day in, day out virus fatigue and working at home fatigue and mask wearing fatigue. Yes, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we're still in the middle of the tunnel, which is why Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, who's a professor at Harvard, calls the season we're in the messy middle. And it's always the hardest in the messy middle. When you're living between the now and the not yet. It's hardest and messiest personally and emotionally and spiritually. Well, that's what I want to explore today as we continue our series on what it takes to rise up from everything 2020 dealt us and take hold of everything that we hope 2021 will bring. How the new year, instead of instantly bringing change, actually is more like the advent of the messy middle. So how do we navigate that with months behind us, but probably months to go? Well, once again, we're going to get some insight from a man named Joseph, whose life we have been digging into throughout this series. If you've been tracking with us, you know that Joseph, before we even get to the slice of his life today, has already had quite a journey. Favored son of a wealthy family, his brothers turned against him out of jealousy, faked his death to their father, and sold him into slavery. Bought by an Egyptian who was also captain of the guard for Pharaoh himself, Joseph began to pick himself up and establish a new life. He rose in prominence and responsibility until he was in complete charge of the captain's affairs. But then the captain's wife took sexual interest in Joseph. Joseph spurned her time and again as a man of integrity until she finally just gave into anger and resentment toward him and falsely accused him of attempted rape. Thrown into prison, Joseph was on the ground, looking up again and needing to rise up again, but it wasn't going to come quickly. We'll see that, like us, he was given a light at the end of the tunnel, but it would take its time in coming. He was in the messy middle. So let's dig into that part of his story, picking it up with the start of his time in prison. This is taken from the book of Genesis, which is the opening book of the Bible. But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Okay, well, let's stop there. Does that sound familiar to you? Well, it did if you were able to join us last week, because it's a repeat of what played out when Joseph was first sold into slavery. Let me just read that part of the story again. It said, Potiphar soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing. That's exactly what the prison warden said. Now, think about that. What does that say about Joseph? I mean, yes, God was with him, but Joseph had a part to play in it too. Sold into slavery, he was soon put in charge of everything. Thrown into prison, he was soon put in charge of everything. Now let's bracket off ethic, work ethic, and skill set. Those are givens. What really set him apart in those situations? Attitude. Attitude. How would you react if you were sold into slavery and forced into indentured servitude? How would you react if you were falsely accused and unjustly thrown into prison, would you be up or would you be down? Would the cup be half empty or would it be half full? Would you instantly become a team player or would you play the victim card? What would your attitude be? Joseph obviously chose to have a positive attitude, even though being sold into slavery was a crappy situation, and being falsely accused and thrown into prison was a crappy situation. He had no power over either one, but he did have power over his attitude, and that choice determined everything. Instead of slavery bringing him down, he used it to rise up. Instead of imprisonment bringing him down, he used it to rise up. So think about your situation right now. What kind of attitude are you having right now? Is it one that is going to keep you down? Or is it one that's going to, hold the potential of you being raised up? It really is a choice. I don't know what you're going through right now, but I do know we're all facing, in various settings and quarters and ways, some serious challenges. But if it's just even if it's just the fatigue of it all, but you are in control of your attitude. You can play the victim card. You can wallow in self-pity. You can psychologically throw in the towel with a why bother mentality because you just think there's no hope and no way out of it and it's only going to go from bad to worse. Or you can make the choice Joseph did. Sold into slavery, I'm going to be the best slave possible and trust God to do with that what he will. Thrown into a prison, I'm going to be a model prisoner. And I'm going to trust God to do with that what he will. This is my situation, and I'm just going to have the best possible attitude toward it I can. Think of it this way. When you're in a situation that is less than ideal, and I was thinking about this just in terms of kind of imagining it the way with your hands. You can react it in a way that you just are wringing your hands with worry, or you can clench your fists in resentment and anger. You can kind of throw them up in the air in kind of helplessness. You can kind of just bury your face in them in some kind of despair. Or you can hold them up and open toward the living God in such a way that invites his blessing. It's your choice because they're your hands. Well, back to Joseph. What happened next? Let's find out. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials, and he put them in the prison where Joseph was, in the palace of the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for quite some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. Okay, a little background here. The cupbearer and the baker of the Pharaoh were extremely prominent figures. They were high-ranking members of the royal court. The reason they were so important is because they were so close to Pharaoh, and they safeguarded him from assassination. For example, the cupbearer was the person who tasted the wine of Pharaoh before he drank. That way, if it was poisoned, he would die, and the Pharaoh would live. He also safeguarded the whole supply, so he was basically in charge of his health and wholeness and safety. That often led to a very close relationship built on trust, and often the cupbearer became a confidant, a counselor, maybe the highest counselor the Pharaoh had. Someone the Pharaoh could trust in terms of judging character and intent and safety and loyalty. Now, we don't know what happened that got the cupbearer and the baker in prison. Somehow the trust had been broken, or at least suspicion had been raised. But they remained obviously very important figures, so we read that another prisoner, Joseph, was assigned to wait on them. Okay, let's keep reading. While they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked them. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, and no one can tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Go ahead and tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream first. He said, "In my dream, I saw a grapevine in front of me. The vine had 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon it produced clusters of ripe grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took a cluster of grapes and squeezed the juice into the cup, and then I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." "Well, this is what the dream means," Joseph said. "The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your position as his chief cupbearer." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given the first dream such a positive interpretation, he said to Joseph, well, I had a dream too. In my dream, there were 3 baskets of white pastries stacked on my head, and the top basket contained all kinds of pastries for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them from the basket on my head. This is what the dream means, Joseph told him. The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift you up and impale your body on a pole, and then birds will come and peck away at your flesh. Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he prepared a banquet for all his officials and staff. He summoned his chief cupbearer and chief baker to join the other officials. He then restored the chief cupbearer to his former position so he could again hand Pharaoh his cup. But Pharaoh impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. God enabled Joseph to give these interpretations, but there's actually more to the story, at least for Joseph personally. After Joseph had told the cupbearer the good news about his dream, he also said this, "And please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place, for I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it." So, when 3 days later it all unfolded just like he had told the cupbearer, and he was now back in place as the right-hand man of Pharaoh, the one person who, with just a wave of his hand, could get him out of prison, you can imagine how Joseph must have felt. There was finally a light at the end of the tunnel, or at least the hope for a light. But in truth, he had landed smack dab in the messy middle and didn't even know it. Let me read the last bit. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. In fact, it would be 2 years before the cupbearer would remember, and the series of events began to unfold that would see Joseph eventually liberated, which means that day after day, week after week, month after month, Joseph had to live with the hope, and only the hope, that there might be an end in sight. So how did he hold up through those 2 years? Years when he didn't know if it would ever end. Well, we have a pretty good indicator. When Pharaoh had a dream that nobody could interpret, and the cupbearer remembered Joseph and his God-given ability to interpret his dream and told Pharaoh about him, here's what happened. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I have heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied. But God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's almost verbatim what Joseph said to the cupbearer. I can't do anything, but my God can. My God can. Meaning that Joseph was walking as intimately, as dependently with God, with as much faith and trust as he had 2 years earlier. He was faithful through the middle, even though it lasted 2 years, and all he had was the hope that there would be a light at the end of the tunnel. How did he do that? This is an important life principle. A positive attitude is what leads to powerful fortitude. A positive attitude is what leads to powerful fortitude. Now, I know that fortitude isn't a word that you hear much anymore, but it's an incredible word. If you look it up online or in a dictionary, you'll read it described as the strength to bear misfortune and to bear pain calmly and patiently. How do you get fortitude? Through attitude. If you want to get through whatever prison time you're in right now, whatever this messy middle is holding for your life, it's going to take a positive attitude that brings about powerful fortitude for however long the messy middle lasts, to remain steadfast so that God's plan can be fully unfolded in your life. And of course, the heart of Joseph's attitude was his faith in God. It was this faith in God that let him have the positive attitude. And that's what is key about the messy middle and the attitude and fortitude needed to get through it. to so endure whatever imprisonment you feel you're in so that you can see what God has in store for you on the other side as a result of you going through it in faith, hope, and trust. Which means the heart of how this is going to turn out for us is how we wait in this middle season. You do know that when we talk about having hope in God, that by definition, and this is really important, you're talking about waiting. Waiting comes with hope. Hope by definition is looking for something in the future, which means automatically that you're going to be waiting for whatever it is you hope for. So really this means waiting in hope. Hope in a God who is in control and knows and cares and can and will act in a way that will not only allow your pain and suffering and emotional exhaustion, that will not allow it to be the final word. Do you know how to do that? How to wait with an attitude that leads to fortitude, grounded in a relationship with the living God, like Joseph did. I remember running across something that I felt gave enormous insight into this whole dynamic. It came from Admiral Jim Stockdale, who was the highest-ranking United States military officer in what was known as the Hanoi Hilton, which was a prisoner of war camp during the height of the Vietnam War. He was tortured over 20 times during his 8-year imprisonment, and he endured that time without any prisoner's rights. He never had a set release date. There wasn't certainty that he would even survive to see his family again, but he shouldered the burden of command, willingly disfigured himself with a razor to prevent being used for propaganda. He exchanged secret information with his wife through their letters and instituted an elaborate internal communication system between his fellow prisoners. After his release, Stockdale became the first 3-star officer in the history of the Navy to wear both aviator wings and the Congressional Medal of Honor. How did a man endure such torture, deprivation, and isolation without knowing really whether there was even going to be light at the end of the tunnel? Well, in a dialogue with author Jim Collins, he said, "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which, in retrospect, I would not trade." Well, then Collins asked him, well, who didn't make it out? And Stockdale said, oh, that's easy. He said, let me quote him, the optimists, the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, we're going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. Then Stockdale said to Collins, he said, this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose. Don't ever confuse that with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. I think that captures what set Joseph apart during his middle. What allowed him to thrive and rise when enslaved, and allowed him to thrive and rise when in prison. He had an attitude that led to fortitude, grounded in the hope that comes from the reality of and a relationship with the living God, not pinning it all on set dates or experiences or desires, but pinning it all on faith in the end of the story. Hope in God is hope in the final chapter. And nowhere and at no time is knowing that more true than when you're in the messy middle.